My family has fallen on hard times. And I was forced into an arranged marriage with a young master from the Hong Kong entertainment circle. However, I took a fancy to his uncle. I pointed at that cold and sinister man. I want to marry him. In the corner. He pinched my chin. And his eyes were full of viciousness. You want to marry me? You're courting death. I looked at this man who loved me deeply in my previous life and exterminated his entire family for my sake. I'd rather die in your arms. I don't want to marry Drake. I want to marry him. In front of both families. I pointed at the cold and sinister man sitting the furthest from me. He seemed like an outsider. Twirling walnuts in his hands. Looking as if he had no desire to compete with the world. No one ever expected that this man would one day go almost crazy and kill everyone in his family for me. As soon as I finished speaking, everyone at the table looked embarrassed. What are you talking about? He's a full 10 years older than you. And the heir of the Cyrus family will eventually be Drake. Don't pull this stunt on me. My mother pulled me and whispered in my ear. Lowering her voice. Afraid that I would say something more foolish. She's just joking. Please don't take it to heart. My father also came to smooth things over and warned me with his eyes. In their eyes, only the heir of the Cyrus family would be beneficial to them. But I didn't care and emphasized it again. I'm not joking. The person I want to marry is Cyrus. This time, the people from the Cyrus family also looked embarrassed and didn't know what to say. They all looked at the male protagonist who was being talked about. He remained as calm as ever, continuing to twirl the walnuts in his hand, showing no visible emotion. Drake beside him wasn't angry upon hearing my words. Instead, he curled his lips into a malicious smile. AYI. If you want to marry my uncle, it also depends on whether he's willing. Don't you think so? It was rumored that Cyrus had no interest in women. Countless women had been arranged for him. But there had never been any that he took a fancy to. In everyone's eyes, he seemed to be a person without any emotions. Only I knew that he loved a woman deeply, to the core of his being. Just when the situation reached a deadlock, the man finally spoke. Well, that's hard to say. As soon as these words were out, the faces of the couple from the Cyrus family also turned a bit unpleasant. To ease the embarrassment and temporarily skip this topic, the head of the Cyrus family waved his hand. We'll talk about this later. The food is getting cold. Let's eat first. Although my family is temporarily in decline, our status and position are still there. The Cyrus family also wants to get a share of the pie, and cooperation would be a win-win situation. Surprisingly, everyone acidly stopped discussing this matter and started talking about things in the arena of fame and fortune. Except for the man I yearned for. After the meal, I made an excuse to go to the restroom. When I went, I deliberately passed by Cyrus, and my skirt casually brushed against the hem of his pants. Sure enough, when I came out of the restroom, a figure pinned me against the corner. He forcefully pinched my chin, and his eyes were filled with viciousness. You like me? You want to marry me? You're courting death. Cyrus is naturally cold and ruthless. A tough guy who is difficult to approach from the outside world. He has his own power without relying on the Drake family. I looked at this man who loved me deeply in my previous life. I'd rather die in your arms. He just sneered, as if what I said was all a joke. He released the hand pinching my chin and gently patted my face. Don't provoke me. Just be with that kid Drake. That's where you belong. This uncle clearly likes me a great deal. Yet he insists on giving me away. He deserves to be without a wife. Compared to Cyrus, Drake is a real lunatic. It seems that this uncle doesn't have a clear understanding of his nephew. I curved my lips and slowly moved closer to him. One hand rested on his chest, and my fingertips tapped his firm pectoral muscles. I stared into his eyes. What if I say I want you instead? His breathing gradually became disordered, and I could even feel his heartbeat accelerating beneath my hand. The walnuts fell to the ground, and he pushed me away. Aria, I'm not someone you can afford to have. Hearing the commotion outside, Cyrus picked up his walnuts and turned to go upstairs. Drake walked over and pretended to care about me. AYI, are you okay? Why did you take so long in the restroom? I shook my head. But my eyes were fixed on the corridor where Cyrus had just passed by. Flashing through my eyes was the scene of Cyrus holding my body, stepping on the blood of his family members all over the ground. His eyes were bloodshot, and tears fell like pearls onto my cold skin. "Darling, I've come to take you home." Thinking of this, my voice trembled involuntarily, and I said coldly to the person in front of me, "I'm going home now." Without waiting for Drake's response, I left straight away. On the way home, my parents both had long faces, seemingly dissatisfied with my performance today. "Aria, what do you mean? Why did it change from Drake to Cyrus? Do you know who Cyrus is and do you still want to marry him? He's a gangster." I turned my head to look out of the car window, not wanting to hear them speak ill of Cyrus. Seeing that I was unmoved, my father became even angrier. "Have you listened at all? We'll pay them a visit again another day and discuss your marriage with Drake." My mother also chimed in to smooth things over. "Yes. AYI. Being with Drake is the right choice for you. Then the Drake family will be in the hands of you and your husband. Stop being stubborn. In my previous life, I was sent into the abyss by my own parents like this. They didn't know that marrying Drake was like stepping into hell. He was a hypocritical devil. Since God has given me another chance, I will definitely not make the same mistake again. Either let me marry Cyrus, or I won't get married at all." Their earnest persuasions were like bubbles, having no effect at all. So my mother came up with a cunning plan, trying to retreat in order to advance. "How about this? If you can get Cyrus to agree to marry you, we'll give our consent. Otherwise, you'll marry Drake obediently." It's laughable. They probably think that Cyrus won't like me and won't marry me. What they don't know is that that man has already loved me deeply and can't stop himself. Although Cyrus has his own plans and concerns, I don't believe that he will easily give me away after I express my feelings. Hearing my mother's words, I finally showed some reaction and turned to look at her. "Okay." She smiled in satisfaction, as if she was sure of success. "Anyway, I'm just a tool for their deal. Once I'm married off, they won't care about my life or death at all." I clearly remember that in my previous life, after I married Drake, I was often beaten and used as a punching bag by him. My parents would just tell me to endure it and scold me for being disobedient and naive. Once, Cyrus accidentally learned about this and gave Drake a beating, warning him that if it happened again, he would break his legs. After that, Drake restrained himself a bit. During that time, the Cyrus family had trouble with their capital turnover and was on the verge of bankruptcy. But my parents turned a blind eye to this and only had their son in their eyes. The Cyrus family then had evil intentions. For a large sum of money, they sent me to that dark and hopeless place, where I suffered endless humiliation and torture and finally died with hatred in my heart. Only Cyrus, upon learning of this, rushed back from abroad without delay. He went almost crazy and killed all the people who had hurt me, and then carried my broken body home. He always thought that if he had been brave enough to take a step forward, or if he had broken Drake's legs and taken me away that time, would everything have been different? Blaming himself, he held my cold body, spat out a mouthful of blood, and slowly closed his eyes. We were like lovers on the run, dying in each other's arms. This time, I will definitely not fulfill my parent wishes and become a victim of the Aria family and the Cyrus family. "Cyrus, I'm determined to have you." They gave me a month's time. If Cyrus didn't show any intention of marrying me, then I had to marry Drake. After that, every day, I chased after Cyrus and pestered him. As a young master of the Cyrus family, he had no place in the Drake family's business. It seemed that he spent his days indulging in pleasure and living a life of luxury. He didn't stop me from following him. He let me be. But he also ignored me. That day, he was drinking with his friends in a bar. Everyone else had a female companion in their arms. But Cyrus was alone. I walked towards him in high heels, and gave a charming smile to the man beside him. "Excuse me, could you please move over a bit?" I gestured with my eyes that I wanted to sit beside Cyrus. The man was first taken aback, and then he looked at the person concerned. Cyrus held his wine glass with his slender and white fingers. He neither agreed nor refused. Seeing that he didn't say anything, the man moved aside a bit, leaving enough space for me to sit beside Cyrus. However, I didn't sit down immediately. Instead, I fell onto Cyrus's lap and put my arms around his neck. Honey, you move over. I don't want to feel the warmth of other men. He remained unmoved, pinched my chin, and looked at me warningly. You know this isn't the place for you, right? A well-behaved girl should go home. He wants to stop me from entering his world. He's daydreaming. I leaned forward, and my red lips almost touched his. He was startled, put his arms around my waist, and placed me on the seat he was sitting on. While he moved aside, everyone else watched with great interest. The originally lively gathering suddenly became extremely quiet, and I remained calm and greeted his friends. Hello, everyone. I'm Cyrus's fiancé. You all have to come and have our wedding candies when we get married. Everyone present was greatly surprised. When did Cyrus, who had no interest in women, suddenly have such a fiancé? Cyrus had a cold face, pursed his lips, and frowned. Don't listen to her nonsense. She's just a child. This sentence indirectly clarified our relationship and also said that I was young, asking everyone not to take it seriously. Most of his friends were from prominent families. If this got out, it would be bad for my reputation. I knew his intention, but I didn't agree with this approach. Whether I'm young or not, you'll know if you give it a try, won't you? Also, having sorry. I'm already 22 years old, which is the right age for marriage. If you're willing, it's not impossible for us to get the marriage certificate tomorrow. Hearing my bold words, Cyrus finally couldn't stand it anymore and grabbed me, intending to leave. Before leaving, he didn't forget to warn everyone in the booth. Don't spread what happened today. Not a word of it. Only after everyone nodded did he pull me away. But I still didn't forget to remind them, shouting as we walked. Don't forget to come to our wedding banquet. Cyrus had a dark look on his face. He covered my mouth while pulling me along. In a deserted alley outside the bar, he pressed me against the wall, his voice low. Aria, didn't I warn you not to provoke me? I nodded obediently. He did seem to have said that. Seeing how obedient I was, his anger dissipated instantly. Then why do you keep pestering me? Is this fun? I don't have time to play childish games with you. He still didn't believe me. Indeed, Drake was young, handsome, wealthy, and the heir of the Cyrus family. Anyone would probably choose Drake instead of this old man who was 10 years older than me. But I just want him. Cyrus. I didn't like a single word he said. Just as he was about to say something more, my red lips suddenly covered his mouth. He froze in place, and time seemed to stand still. Seeing that he didn't resist, I became even bolder and tried to take it a step further. But he turned into a coward and dodged. I clasped his neck and pressed my lips against his again, not giving him a chance to refuse. When he came to his senses, he tightly closed his lips and resisted my actions. With my lips still on his, I gave a mocking smile. Cyrus, are you a man or not? Any man would refute upon hearing such words. And I took this opportunity to deepen the kiss. The man opposite seemed to be inspired and took the initiative instead. In this deserted alley, the two figures were entangled. He only let me go when I was out of breath and gasping slightly. I smiled faintly and gently stroked the moisture at the corner of his mouth, my gaze moving from top to bottom. Clearly, you have feelings for me. Why do you keep pushing me away? His reason seemed to return, and he immediately released the hand that was around my waist. Sorry. I lost my composure. I put his hand back on my waist, wrapped my arms around his neck, just like a loving couple. I like it when you lose your composure. You might as well do it a few more times. Cyrus looked at me with his deep eyes, as if he wanted to say something but held back. I placed my fingertips on his lips. Shed. Don't talk. I don't want to hear any of it. Your actions are much more honest than your words. He took my hand away, gently rubbed it with his palm that had some calluses, and then let it go. Aria, I'm in the dark, and I don't want you to get involved. You. Before he could finish, I interrupted him. Then I can be your son and light up your world. I knew that Cyrus probably had his own forces abroad, aiming to confront the crafty old-timers of the Drake family one day. Cyrus had never been favored since he was a child. The old couple, the heiress, should have doted on their youngest son to the extreme since they had him late in life. However, due to Cyrus's mother being old, being a high-risk pregnant woman, and having a premature birth led to some problems with the child in certain aspects. When he was a child, he was considered mentally disabled by his family. He was also extremely irritable and was disliked from birth. He had never been favored since childhood, and the old couple, the heiress, didn't even raise him as a son. They focused all their attention on their eldest son and cultivated him intensively. Cyrus's world gradually became darker. So he was sensitive and inferior. Thinking that I deserved someone better. I could see the blue veins on his hand as he clenched his fist tightly. He seemed to be trying his best to hold back something. Then he punched the wall behind me heavily. I instinctively covered my head, really frightened. The man in front of me had a bleeding hand but didn't seem to feel the pain. He shook his head helplessly and laughed at himself. You see, you're afraid of me. Sometimes I can't even control my emotions. What do you have to like me for? Just go. Don't come to places like this again. Go back to your own world. I was a bit angry. Why was he pushing me away step by step when I was trying so hard to get closer to him? Cyrus. You're a coward. Is it really that hard to admit that you like me? Fine, hadn't fulfilled fiancé. If you don't want me, I'll marry Drake. Don't feel sorry when he bullies me to death. Of course. I was just saying those words out of anger. If I had to do it again, how could I jump into the fire pit once more? After saying that, I left without looking back, but my steps were as slow as a snail's. Just to give Cyrus a chance to catch up with me. In the end, I was almost out of the street. But I didn't see a single trace of him. I was so angry. My son in the future must not be like his father. Or he won't be able to marry a wife. Although I was angry, I still turned around and went to the pharmacy. When I turned back, Cyrus was still there. The spark at his fingertips made him look especially lonely. The smoke he exhaled dissipated into the night, but an extra layer of coldness seemed to cover him. When he saw me coming, he extinguished the cigarette and threw it into the trash can beside him. He seemed a bit flustered. When he saw me staring at his hand, he sheepishly put his hand behind his back. Why did you come back? I threw the medicine to him, and he caught it. I'm afraid that if someone loses too much blood, I won't have a husband anymore. I taunted him in a sarcastic tone. In fact, his wound wasn't very serious. And he seemed to be used to it. Not feeling anything at all. But I felt sorry for him. I wanted someone to care about him when he was hurt. Seeing that he stood there with a complicated expression and didn't move, I snatched the medicine back, took his hand, and carefully treated the wound for him. I gently blew on it, feeling really sorry for him. His finger moved slightly. I thought I had hurt him. So I looked up and found that he was also looking at me. Did I hurt you? He shook his head and didn't say anything. So I continued to treat his wound. After I was done, he disposed of some of the trash. Let's go. It's getting late. I'll send you back. He stopped in his tracks and turned back. Also, don't call anyone husband, in the future. A girl should be reserved. I smiled obediently at him. Okay, hadn't fulfilled fiancé. Husband. The tips of his ears turned red instantly. And he turned around to leave. I couldn't help laughing where I stood. This uncle was quite innocent and cute. Seeing that I didn't follow, he turned to look at me. Hurry up and follow. For some reason. Since that day, Cyrus seemed to be deliberately avoiding me. I couldn't find him anywhere. There was no sign of him at all. And he didn't respond to my messages or calls. I was like a deflated balloon. Feeling helpless. I thought he was deliberately avoiding me and didn't want to have too much involvement with me. Until one day, when I was looking for him in the billiard hall he often went to, I saw the friend who had moved his butt in the bar before. I grabbed him and asked, Cyrus? He went to China. Didn't you know? It seems that there was some problem there and he needed to go back to solve it. Upon learning the news about Cyrus, I immediately booked a flight ticket to China without delay. Of course. Before leaving, I also added the contact information of that. But guy in case I couldn't find Cyrus again and there would still be someone I could contact. According to the address provided by that. But guy. I took a taxi as soon as I got off the plane. I hadn't seen Cyrus for almost a week. And I really missed him. More importantly, the time left for me to pursue my man was running out. If the final deadline came, how should I deal with it? When I arrived at the provided address, it was a place that looked like a factory building. Seeing that the gate wasn't closed, I walked straight in. After I went in, I seemed to hear a series of screams. I walked towards the source of the sound, and the sound gradually became clearer. Are you going to say it or not? It was the voice I was familiar with, but it was much harsher than when he talked to me. When I found the source of the sound, I saw a man covered in blood kneeling on the ground. Cyrus stepped on the man's finger viciously, showing no mercy. The screams echoed in every corner. And it was really terrifying. He quickly noticed me with his sharp senses. Who? When he saw it was me, he finally stopped his actions. And his face showed some panic. I just stood there. The scene in front of me was so shocking that I didn't know what to do for a moment. Cyrus quickly walked up to me and covered my wide-open eyes. He said coldly, "Why did you come here?" "I missed you." I didn't even realize that my voice was trembling a little at that moment. I only heard the man sigh helplessly. He turned my body around and pushed me forward. Before leaving, he didn't forget to give instructions to his subordinates behind him. Bind him up for me. Make sure he's still alive. Then he took me out. In the car, Cyrus was driving with a blank expression. I still glances at him from time to time. He seemed to be unable to stand my curious gaze and finally spoke. "If you have anything to ask, just ask. I'll send you to the airport and buy you a ticket for the nearest flight back to your country." Did I come all the way here just for you to send me back? I didn't get any benefits at all. I won't go back even if you kill me. I'm not going back. Take me to where you live. His hand gripping the steering wheel tightened. And I even saw his Adam's apple move involuntarily. He manually turned my head forward, not allowing me to look at him anymore. "Aren't you afraid? Stop fooling around. You saw it too. We're from two different worlds." I didn't care and looked at him again. Why would I be afraid of my man? "Would you hurt me?" There was silence in the car for a long time. Just when I thought the topic was going to be skipped, he spoke. "No." I smiled silently, firmly grasping the man's heart. But he still didn't give up the idea of sending me back to my home country. I had no choice but to use the ploy of pretending to be injured. My stomach hurts. Cyrus. My stomach really hurts." I covered my stomach, wearing a pained expression. And my whole face almost wrinkled up. Seeing me like this, he seemed to lose his ability to think and parked the car by the roadside without any suspicion. He anxiously checked my condition. "What's wrong? Why does your stomach hurt suddenly? Which specific part is it?" Seeing me breaking out in cold sweat, he was a bit flustered. "I'll take you to the hospital." The next second, he started the car and wanted to take me to the hospital. I held his hand on the steering wheel. "It's not necessary. It's just menstrual cramps. I'll be fine after taking ibuprofen and lying in bed for a while." He squinted his eyes at me, as if trying to figure out whether what I said was true or false. I wasn't sure if he believed me or not. But in the end, he turned the car around and drove back. I was really exhausted from taking consecutive flights, and unconsciously fell asleep on the way. When I woke up, I was already lying on a big bed. The cold tone decoration style should be Cyrus's room. Feeling the warmth on my stomach, I realized there was a hot water bag warming it. I couldn't help but laugh and roll around on the bed. I didn't know where Cyrus was at the moment, so I got up and walked out of the room to look for him. I glanced around but didn't see his figure. Finally, I saw his vaguely visible figure in the bathroom. I took a deep breath. Those muscle lines clearly showed that he was the perfect material to be my husband. I just sat on the sofa in the living room, holding back my saliva and admiring the handsome man taking a shower behind the frosted glass. It's not that I didn't want to go in. This man was on high alert against me and locked the door. After a while, the door I had been eagerly waiting for finally opened. The man came out only wrapped in a bath towel, with some undried water droplets on his body. I immediately drooled shamelessly. Cyrus, who opened the door, didn't expect that I had already woken up and was looking at him without looking away. He calmly crossed his arms over his chest. And his face instantly turned red. He walked quickly towards the cloakroom. Before going in, he didn't forget to scold me. Can you be a bit more reserved as a girl? You're acting like a pervert. Then he slammed the door and locked it. I shook my head. My shy husband-to-be. When Cyrus came out again, he was already dressed tightly. I felt a bit embarrassed. Did I look that thirsty for him? He was guarding against me like I was a wolf. What do you mean by wearing long sleeves in the middle of summer? He ignored my words and just walked towards the kitchen. When he came out again, he was holding a cup in his hand. Drink this. It was a cup of steaming brown sugar water. I took it with a guilty conscience and sipped it little by little. When I returned the empty cup to him, my fingertips hooked his. The man turned his head away awkwardly, looking very easily flustered. What on earth do you want to do? You. Cyrus opened his mouth in place, frowning and looking at me. When a normal man hears such words, shouldn't he take the initiative? What does that expression of his? As if he's sitting there unmoved and feeling uncomfortable. Mean? I pulled his hand, turned around, and pressed him onto the sofa. I casually placed the cup on the tea table. I leaned in and kissed the lips I had been longing for day and night. As if punishing him, I gently bit his lower lip. He let out a soft hiss of pain. My little delicate husband was really sensitive. My hand was placed on his pectoral muscles, feeling his heart beating rapidly that he couldn't suppress. Taking advantage of his inattentiveness, I slipped my hand into his clothes. I passed over those raised muscles and counted them. There were 8. I don't know if he was so aroused by me that he couldn't resist, but he seemed to wake up instantly and nervously grabbed my wandering hand. He picked me up and placed me on the sofa as if I were a child, breathing heavily. What a great atmosphere. It could have just gone naturally. Where are you going? Seeing that he was about to leave, I was a bit anxious and afraid that he would go away. To the toilet. You stay put. He was a bit angry, but I hooked his leg with my foot to stop him from leaving. I'm not having my period. I gave a very obvious hint. Right? He mercilessly pushed my foot away and went to the toilet expressionlessly to take another shower. It was only after half an hour that he slowly came out of the toilet. The toilet, which had originally been warm, now gave off a chill. I didn't understand why an old man was being so timid and had so many concerns. I had already been so proactive. I realized that I couldn't keep having this kind of drawn-out interaction with this wooden-headed man, where he would never show his true feelings. So I planned to have a good talk with him and express our feelings to each other. So I reservedly pulled him to sit beside me, wrapped my arm around his, and pressed myself closely against him. Cyrus, let's have a talk. He glanced at my restless hand. Sorry. The attractiveness of a handsome man made me lose my self-control. I quickly withdrew my wandering hand and placed it obediently on my own leg. I put away my lustful thoughts, got back to the main point, and looked at him seriously. Cyrus, I don't like Drake, and I don't want to marry him. You don't have to worry about me. Just go ahead and do what you want to do. I'm on your side. You understand what I mean, right? In my previous life, it was because I married Drake that I disrupted all of Cyrus's plans. In the eyes of outsiders, Cyrus was a cynical young master who had never been valued since childhood. Even his family thought so. So they never paid attention to him. In fact, Cyrus had been quietly building his own business. His plan was to make his business bigger and stronger and bring down the Drake family. He wanted to show everyone in the family who was really the idiot and who was the useless one. He wanted to slap in the face those who had looked down on him with prejudice and insulted him since he was a child. But in my previous life, because of my sudden appearance, he couldn't bear it anymore. He didn't want me to suffer any grievances. So he cancelled his plan. However, he didn't expect that even without his intervention, after the Cyrus family was handed over to Drake, it was completely ruined. When I said these words, Cyrus looked at me in surprise. How do you know all this? Of course it's nonsense. I've lived through a whole lifetime. If I didn't know these things, Wouldn't it be like I lived in vain? Of course. I couldn't tell him that. Because I love you. So I know everything about you. So don't avoid me anymore. Okay? If you let me marry Drake, you will regret it. I want you to marry me. Will you marry me? If it were someone else, they might think I was a spy or an undercover agent. But I'm Aria. The person Cyrus loves deeply. He will believe me without hesitation. He hesitated for a long time, his eyes flickering as he looked at me. Finally, having fell Ryan Sashin. His lips trembled as he said a single word. I showed a victorious expression, winked at him, and couldn't wait to get close to him. When will you be free, Cyrus? Let's go and get the marriage certificate? Cyrus's Adam's apple tightened, and he seemed a bit nervous. You go back to your home country first. I still have some things to deal with here. I knew that he really did have some troubles to solve here. But I also didn't want to go back to that cold home. So I acted coquettishly toward Cyrus. Let me stay here with you. Okay? I'll be good and won't disturb you. He suddenly stood up abruptly and said awkwardly, as you wish. Then he left right away, saying that he still had something to deal with. It was dark and windy at night. What kind of thing did he have to do in the middle of the night? There was such a beautiful woman at home. But he could really stay unmoved. Forget it. He also needed some time to digest this and get used to his new identity. After a while, my phone lit up. I ordered food for you. It will be delivered later. Remember to pick it up. He's quite thoughtful. This guy. I didn't know if Cyrus would come back tonight. I lay on the sofa watching TV, hoping to wait for him to come back. I waited and then fell asleep. In a daze. It seemed that he had come back. He carried me into the room. And I mumbled. Cyrus. You're back? This time. Let me love you well. Okay? I thought I was dreaming and hugged his neck. Not wanting to let go. Don't leave. Don't abandon me. I'm scared. After falling asleep, the painful and fragmented scenes from my previous life always appeared in my dreams. I was so afraid that if Cyrus left me in this life, would I repeat the same mistakes and be left with no way out to face those things again? In a daze. Someone was soothing me like petting a kitten. Be good, I won't leave. Go to sleep. I'm not sure if it was because of that familiar smell or those gentle words. But I quickly fell back into a deep sleep, and those scenes didn't appear in my mind anymore. I had a really sound sleep. When I got up, I couldn't help but stretch comfortably and groped around on the bed. Suddenly, having felt I felt a burst of heat. And I quickly withdrew my hand in fright. Then I realized that there was such a big person lying next to me. When did he come back? The man had his eyes tightly closed and seemed not to have woken up yet. I lay beside him and playfully raised my feet. My fingertips traced his facial features. My man is so handsome. Although he's already 32, there are no traces of time on his face at all. This tall nose bridge. I really want to slide down it like on a slide. These sexy lips. I really want to press him onto the bed and kiss him hard. When I stroked his Adam's apple, the man suddenly opened his eyes and grabbed my hand. Aria. Don't play with fire in the morning. Looking at the man who was so annoyed by my teasing, I couldn't help but want to tease him. I can't help it. My man is too handsome to resist. Cyrus suddenly gave a charming and evil smile, like a hunter approaching its prey, and slowly moved closer to me. I instinctively stepped back and swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He grabbed my legs that were constantly retreating, gently pulled them forward, and brought me within his reach. Weren't you so brave? What's wrong? Are you scared? If I want to do something to you now, it's perfectly legitimate. Right? Fiancé. He whispered in my ear. And every word gently brushed against my heartstring. Unable to stand the pounding of my heart, I slipped away like a fish. Well, I'm going to wash up first. No wonder Cyrus was always at a loss when I flirted with him before. After I experienced the feeling of being flirted with, I finally understood that sense of helplessness. Now that our relationship was confirmed, the next step was to bring down the Drake family and send all those devils in the Cyrus family to hell. I told Cyrus that all his closest relatives were not good people. It was only because Cyrus had established the image of a useless person in the family that they didn't see him as a stumbling block or a competitor. Otherwise, they would have targeted him long ago. I know you don't have much affection for them. But I want to remind you that you're not only dealing with those crafty old-timers in the Cyrus family. The people closest to you are actually the ones you should pay the most attention to. His elder brother and his nephew were all hypocritical scumbags. On the surface, they were gentle, elegant, polite, and from noble families. In reality, they treated people like dogs. Or even worse than dogs. Perhaps my hateful gaze was too obvious. He frowned, and his eyes gradually became fierce. What excessive things did they do to you? Instead of asking me why I said such things about his family, he asked about my situation instead. I hesitated. I couldn't just say that they had treated me like a plaything and toyed with me at will. Anyway, hadn't so felt bad Sashim. I wish I could skin them alive. I held his hand and played with his well-defined fingers. Cyrus. I want to live a stable life. After we solve everything, shall we hold a wedding that belongs to us? Cyrus pulled me into his arms and looked at me firmly. Okay. He didn't ask me too much about that matter. He was a smart person. Seeing that I didn't want to talk about it, he didn't press further. We stayed in China for about a week. During these days, Cyrus was very busy, and I could only catch a glimpse of him when I was sleeping. As for me, I reviewed the battle plan at home every day. I remembered that in my previous life, after I married Drake, the Aria family made a comeback against the odds and rose to a higher position in the business world. The Drake family, of course, wouldn't let go of such a big piece of the pie and wanted to cooperate with the Aria family to develop the land in the East City. I remembered that they almost went all out at that time, just for that prosperous land. As long as we started from this point, we could bring down both families at once. I just didn't know if things would develop the same way as in the previous life since I didn't marry Drake this time. Finally, having fulfilled my absai, after solving the matters here, Cyrus took me on the journey back home. As soon as I got home, my mother dragged me and started scolding me. Where the hell have you been? You didn't say a word and couldn't be reached. I thought you even abandoned your family to escape the arranged marriage. I changed my shoes impatiently, picked up my suitcase, and wanted to go back to my room. I went on vacation to relax. My father couldn't help but scold me a few words as well. You went on vacation? Do you know what our family situation is now? You just went out and caused trouble. Do you know how much money your younger brother needs for school? Then he turned to look at my mother. Look at the spendthrift daughter you gave birth to. Why didn't he say anything when his son spent hundreds of thousands on games? I'm really speechless. My mother was originally angry and wanted to vent her anger on me. But then she rolled her eyes, as if she had thought of something. AYI. Our 1-month agreement has expired. I'm sure Cyrus didn't agree to accept you, right? Just prepare yourself properly. We'll go to the Cyrus family in a couple of days to discuss the marriage. I nodded. It was true. We had agreed to come back and get the marriage certificate. Thinking of this, I picked up my phone and quickly typed a message to Cyrus, asking him to get his household registration book ready. Okay, heading till and Sashim. I'll go get the marriage certificate tomorrow. Let's not hold the wedding banquet too soon. I'll discuss it with Cyrus later and then hold it. After all, we might not be able to hold the banquet. At first, when she saw me nodding and saying that I was going to get the marriage certificate, she was so happy that she couldn't close her mouth. Good. Good. Yee. Good. But when she realized the name I mentioned in the second half of my sentence, she finally reacted. What? Cyrus? Ignoring the people who were going crazy behind me, I picked up my suitcase and ran. I had to go to the study and get the household registration book quickly in case they wouldn't give it to me later. When I got back to my room, I felt my phone vibrating. It was a message from Cyrus. A question mark? Why a question mark? Do you want to be a heartless person? He replied instantly. I could feel his strong desire to survive. No. I'll come to pick you up tomorrow morning. No need. You can turn around and come back to pick me up now. I'll go to your place tonight. It's not that I'm being eager. Mainly, I'm afraid that the song couple will suddenly go back on their word, lock me at home, or take back the household registration book. That would slow down my marriage, wouldn't it? To avoid such trouble, I had to solve it from the root. Cyrus and I successfully got the marriage certificate. In the car, I held the marriage certificate in my hand and couldn't put it down. Cyrus snatched it away and threw it onto the back seat. He leaned over and kissed me fiercely. A married man is really different. He was like a fierce wolf, biting and kissing. It turned out that he was a wolf in sheep's clothing before. Now that he was on the road, with the certificate, he took off the sheep's skin and showed his true colors. But I liked it and responded to him enthusiastically. Soon after we got the marriage certificate, the stock of the Aria family suddenly increased greatly. My father and the others were overjoyed and thought it was brought by the happy event of my marriage. They happily invited both families to a dinner. Of course, I had to go to this dinner. Since things were developing like in the previous life, there was a high probability that the Cyrus family would take this opportunity to propose a cooperation. When we arrived at this Hong Men banquet, a burning and jealous gaze kept staring at the hands that Cyrus and I were holding. I think in the previous life, Drake didn't have any feelings of love for me. He just wanted to buy a favorite commodity home. But what's with his gaze now? Why does he look jealous? Cyrus and I were just there to have a meal and, by the way, listen to their next cooperation plan. In fact, Cyrus had already acquired the land and wanted to cooperate on. The next step was to wait for the fish to take the bait. Sure enough, when the cooperation was reached, Cyrus found a loophole in the contract. They got the barren land in the West City, which had no value at all. We reaped the benefits as the fishermen. In the end, both the Huo and Song families were ruthlessly acquired by Cyrus. In the office of the Drake family group, Cyrus, as the chairman, sat in the upper seat, and the people below were whispering. I handed the documents to him while sitting beside him. Although he looked serious on the surface, he secretly touched my hand. Without further ado, I have to rush to the next event. Today, I will lead the Drake family on the remaining path, and our group needs a major overhaul. I don't need to say much about the list in the document, right? I don't want to see the people on it tomorrow. Drake sat there fiercely, looking unwilling. But it was indeed him who was thoughtless. In the previous life, the Drake family was squandered away by him. And Cyrus, all alone, had also built such a huge influence. In this regard, Drake could never compare with Cyrus. In the underground garage, Cyrus still had a few things to wrap up, so I went downstairs first. Unexpectedly, I met Drake. This crazy guy. He covered my mouth and pulled me to the corner of the corridor. Oh why did you choose my uncle instead of me? Clearly, having fulfilled my fashion, I'm better than him. His eyes seemed to want to eat me alive. Did you see that? He's a heartless bastard. He even tricks his own family members. Do you think you'll have an important place in his heart? I immediately slapped him. I couldn't stand him speaking ill of Cyrus. You're the fucking bastard. If you hadn't had a guilty conscience, how could we have found a loophole? He laughed maniacally. You too? You're in cahoots? He suddenly pinched my cheeks and leaned in on me like a pervert. Tell me, haven't fulfilled my ipsi. If I do something to my aunt, will my little uncle go crazy? The fear from the previous life suddenly hit me. It's not true that I'm not afraid, but I believe Cyrus will arrive in time. When Drake covered my mouth, I pressed the power button of my phone 5 times in a row and dialed the emergency contact number. HEITUI. I couldn't help spitting at him. He deserved this disgust. Don't think that just because you do something to me in the corridor of Building 3, my husband will let you go. My overly obvious hint made Drake notice it immediately. He angrily threw the phone out of my hand. Then let's see who's faster. My little uncle or me? Come on. Your little uncle can last a long time. He's not fast at all. Seeing that I still had the mood to joke and tease, Drake's face turned green. I'll see how long you can be so cocky. After saying that, this ugly face was about to bite my neck, and I resisted with all my might. Someone outside gave a roundhouse kick and kicked the door open. He pulled the person on me away and gave him a beating. Drake? I gave you a chance. Don't blame me for being ruthless. I knew in my previous life that Drake had a tendency to abuse women. So I had been collecting evidence this time. I hoped to bring him to justice. To make his crime even worse, Cyrus also provided the police with the black industries that Drake had secretly run. Both Drake and his father were involved. And they ended up in prison from then on. At home, Cyrus held me tightly in his arms. Sorry. I didn't protect you well. He had also said this sentence in the previous life. I couldn't hold back my tears and they streamed down. I shook my head. No. I want to thank you. Thank you for saving my whole life. I didn't pay attention to the Aria family anymore. I just fulfilled my obligation to support them. I transferred the alimony in one lump sum and then cut off all contact with them. At night, because of his self-blame, Cyrus made me happy again and again. No. Is this making me happy or punishing me? When I was about to fall asleep, he still didn't let me go. I warn you, Cyrus. If you keep this up, you'll lose your wife. He grabbed me as I tried to escape. Wife. This is the last time. I don't believe him. It's always the last time. Doesn't my life as a wife matter? We held our wedding on an island. There were no guests or family members. Just Aria and Cyrus. We only had each other and belonged only to each other. He held my hand and walked down the flower-lined path. I smiled and looked at him. Dear Mr. Cyrus. Do you want to marry Miss Aria as your wife? He leaned down and kissed me. I do. Until death do us part. The end.